Julian Vega built towers that touched the sky, but nothing ever filled the emptiness inside him. In the heart of Miami's real estate empire, Julian seemed untouchable, until a yacht accident shattered his world and claimed the life of his sister. Grief nearly consumed him. Until he met Camila, a gifted painter whose fire-colored eyes and radiant soul reignited his will to live. They built a quiet life, filled with love and a daughter named Sophia, until both suddenly vanished without a trace. Now, 6 years later, Julian rescues a little girl in a crowded market and sees a familiar smile. But behind that smile lies a buried secret, one that could expose betrayal, murder, and a truth that will break him all over again. Who is trying to keep Julian from finding out the truth? And why does Sophia look exactly like the daughter he lost? This is a story of love, loss, revenge, and the fight for justice, where every brushstroke, every heartbeat, leads closer to redemption. Don't miss this gripping story. Subscribe now for more emotionally powerful stories that uncover the truth and fight for healing. Julian Vega stared out at the sea from the rooftop of his South Beach mansion, the horizon blurring through a haze of salt and sorrow. It had been 3 weeks since the yacht accident. 3 weeks since his younger sister Isabella was pulled beneath the waves by a current no one had seen coming. 3 weeks of aching silence in a home that once echoed with laughter. He'd always been the pillar, the man who built the Vega empire on grit and glamour, but Isabella had been his anchor, his softer half, the last thread connecting him to a past that wasn't driven by power or headlines. The memorial had been private, by Julian's request. He couldn't bear the spectacle, couldn't stand the thought of empty condolences from people who only knew him from press clippings and quarterly earnings reports. Instead, he lit a candle on the beach where she once collected shells as a child, whispering her name into the wind until his voice cracked. That night, for the first time in a decade, he didn't sleep in the master suite. He curled up on the guest bed Isabella always used, still smelling faintly of her perfume and coconut shampoo, and let the darkness cradle his grief. The next morning, something shifted. Julian emerged from the depths of the morning and returned to his office overlooking Biscayne Bay. Meetings, acquisitions, contracts, the machinery of wealth never stopped, but inside, he moved like a man half alive. Until she walked in. Camila Diaz wasn't on the agenda. She'd come with Rosa, his longtime housekeeper, who had insisted that her niece needed a temporary space to paint while her apartment was fumigated. Julian barely looked up from his screen when they entered, but then he heard her laugh, soft, clear, unbothered by the steel and glass around her, and something tugged at him. Camila was unlike anyone who had ever stepped into Julian's sterile world of luxury. She wore paint-streaked jeans, had a hair tie wrapped loosely around her wrist, and eyes the color of burnt amber. When she spoke, it was like sunlight cracked through storm clouds. "You don't have to look so miserable in a house this beautiful," she said as she wandered into the gallery room, canvases and sketchbooks clutched against her chest. Julian raised an eyebrow. "It's not misery, it's work. It's loneliness," she replied gently, without judgment. "You've built a kingdom with no one to sit beside you." The words pierced something he didn't know was still bleeding. He said nothing, just turned away, pretending to check his messages. Over the next few days, Camila came and went, leaving behind a trail of color. Canvases leaned against hallway walls. The scent of turpentine mingled with sea air. Julian, who hadn't noticed details in months, suddenly found himself pausing to study the way her brush strokes moved like wind through branches. Her art wasn't about precision. It was about emotion. Raw, beautiful, unfiltered. One evening, he found her on the back patio painting the sunset. She didn't flinch when he sat beside her. "I don't remember the last time I watched a sunset," he admitted quietly. Camila glanced at him, her expression soft. Maybe you weren't ready to feel it until now. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn from coral to violet. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss who you were before all this?" Julian swallowed hard. "I don't think that man exists anymore." Camila set down her brush. "He does. He's just hiding under the weight of loss." For the first time since Isabella's death, Julian let the silence stretch without filling it with work. That night, he slept with the windows open, the scent of sea and paint drifting in. And, by morning, Camila had painted him, standing at the edge of the water, looking toward the horizon, alone, but not entirely broken. Camila didn't leave. Not that week, not that month, not even after Julian offered her the keys to one of his beachfront penthouses, which she politely declined. "Too quiet," she said with a teasing smile, wiping paint off her cheek with the back of her hand. "Besides, the light's better here." The mansion came alive around her, no longer a mausoleum of polished marble and glass, but a breathing, imperfect space filled with color and laughter. She painted barefoot in the hallways. Left notes taped to Julian's fridge. "Eat something that didn't come out of a package today." He started waking earlier just to hear her humming in the kitchen, her voice soft over the simmer of coffee. Julian had known women, models, actresses, real estate executives with million-dollar smiles, but Camila was different. She asked nothing from him, expected nothing but honesty. Her kindness was never performative, her affection unfiltered. They fell in love slowly, then all at once. On a warm June evening, beneath a canopy of string lights Julian strung by hand in the backyard, he asked her to marry him. Not with a grand gesture or paparazzi on standby, but barefoot on the grass, her favorite paintbrush in his hand instead of a ring. Camila laughed, crying at the same time. "You're supposed to use a diamond." "I wanted to give you something you actually use," Julian murmured. "Besides, I'm saving the diamond for the day we meet someone who'll call you Mom." Fate, it seemed, didn't make them wait long. Their daughter was born 9 months later, on a breezy spring afternoon when the jacaranda trees were in bloom. Camila named her Sofia Isabella Vega. Julian held her in trembling arms, eyes flooding with tears as her tiny fingers curled around his. "She has your mother's eyes," Camila whispered, exhausted but glowing. Julian could only nod, completely undone. Life after that was everything he never dared to hope for. Sophia grew into a spirited little girl, curious, mischievous, and brilliantly observant. Her first word was "Mama," but her second was "son." Camila said it was because Julian always carried her to the window every morning, whispering, "See that? That's another day we get to love you." Julian stopped traveling, delegated more, walked away from 2 high-profile deals just to be home for Sophia's first steps. Every night, no matter how tired, he read her the same bedtime story, The Paper Moon Princess, because she once said she liked the way his voice sounded when he read it slowly. Their home became a sanctuary of crayon murals, handprint paintings, spilled glitter, and spontaneous dance parties in the living room. Camila painted less for exhibitions and more for joy. Julian laughed more, slept better, dreamed again. And yet, behind the warmth of their life, a shadow waited. His name was Marco Varela, Julian's closest friend from college. They had started the company together once upon a time, built it from the ground up. But as Julian's heart found its true north in Camila and Sophia, Marco's ambition twisted into resentment. Marco hadn't taken the wedding invitation well, hadn't bothered to send a gift or even attend. He cited conflict of interest, but Julian knew better. Camila never felt comfortable around him. "His smile doesn't reach his eyes," she'd said once, quietly, while they walked hand in hand through Wynwood. Still, Julian didn't want to believe it. He owed Marco too much, or so he thought. Behind the scenes, Marco began to pry. He hired the private investigators, dug into Camilla's past, her student loans, her art school professors, even her childhood foster records. But every lead led nowhere. Camilla's life, though simple, was clean. She had no hidden debts, no secret scandals, only canvases, a few late payments on old studio rent, and a journal filled with hopeful sketches of places she wanted to paint someday. The investigation turned up nothing. But Marco's jealousy grew into something deeper, darker. From the boardroom, he watched Julian cradle Sophia in family Christmas cards. Watched the empire they'd built twist around a man who suddenly cared more about school pickups than stock valuations. And he hated it. Still, on the surface, Marco remained civil, smiling at meetings, toasting to Julian's fatherhood milestones, always watching. One night, as Sophia sat on Julian's lap drawing a flower with orange marker on his cufflink, Camilla glanced over and whispered, "Do you ever wonder if someone could envy something this pure?" Julian kissed her hand softly. "If they do, I pity them." Camilla didn't reply. She only hugged Sophia a little tighter that night. And, somewhere, far from their laughter and light, Marco Varela poured a second glass of scotch and began planning. The last day, Julian saw Camilla began like any other, sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains, the smell of fresh bread wafting in from the kitchen, and Sophia's laughter echoing through the halls. Julian had kissed them both goodbye that morning. Camilla had flour on her nose and Sophia had jelly on her fingers. He wiped them both clean before stepping into his black SUV, unaware that the warmth he felt in that moment would be the last for years. By afternoon, they were gone. No message, no call, just a voicemail from Camilla's number that played only static, and a text from her, 7 words that sliced him in half. "Don't look for me. Trust me." At first, Julian thought it was a mistake, a glitch. He called. Again. No answer. He raced home, heart pounding, convinced something was wrong with the phones. But the house was silent. Camilla's art supplies were gone. So was Sophia's pink backpack. Her favorite stuffed koala was missing from the couch. The framed photo of the 3 of them, Sophia in the middle, cheeks round with joy, was still on the table, but the air in the room had changed. The soul was missing. Julian checked every camera, every traffic feed near their neighborhood. Nothing. No one had seen them leave. No cab had been called. No friend contacted. Only one thing had changed since morning: Marco. He'd left a file on Julian's desk at the office just before the disappearance. It was thick, manila, and sealed with a red string tie, like something from an old spy novel. Inside were documents, allegations that Camilla had quietly siphoned off hundreds of thousands from one of Julian's real estate projects. Offshore transfers, forged invoices, a paper trail that Marco claimed led directly to her. Julian couldn't breathe. He stared at the spreadsheets, then at the photograph included at the back. Camila, standing outside a bank in Little Havana, holding Sophia's hand. The timestamp matched the last transfer date. But something didn't sit right. Camila couldn't even keep track of which day the recycling was picked up. She didn't know how to log into their joint account without asking for help. And when they'd bought furniture for Sophia's nursery, she'd insisted on thrifting rather than spending a fortune at designer boutiques. So why would she steal? Still, the timing was damning. The money trail, the vanishing act, the silence. Marco was quick to offer support. "She played you, brother," he said with a sympathetic tone that felt oddly rehearsed. "You're not the first man to fall for a beautiful con artist." Julian had said nothing in return. Just stared out the window of his office as storm clouds rolled in over Biscayne Bay. In the days that followed, Julian did something he never expected of himself. He doubted her, just for a moment. That sharp, bitter seed planted by Marco sprouted. Could she really have run away? Had everything been a lie? But then he found Sophia's crayon drawing wedged under the cushion of their couch. It was a simple picture. 3 stick figures holding hands, one with curly hair, one with blue eyes, one tiny with a crown. They were smiling. They were under a big yellow sun, and above them, in Sophia's wobbly handwriting, was one word: us. Julian wept for hours. He didn't call the police, didn't go to the press. Some part of him believed that wherever Camilla was, whatever reason she had for disappearing, was too fragile to be shouted into the world. He waited, hoped, checked every airport, every hospital, every shelter in Miami. And got nothing. Months passed, then a year. The scandal began to brew. Blogs hinted at embezzlement. Rumors spread through Miami's elite. Julian's competitors quietly circled, ready to strike at the scent of weakness. But he held the line, defended Camilla when he could, denied the allegations when he couldn't. Marco, meanwhile, rose in influence, offering to temporarily take over projects Julian no longer had the heart to manage. The board saw his efficiency and began to praise his foresight. Julian didn't care. He kept Camilla's last painting hanging behind his desk, an abstract swirl of coral blues and sunlit gold, titled Safe. He stared at it every night before leaving, wished he could ask her why, wished he could hold Sophia one more time. 3 years later, Marco made partner. 6 years after the disappearance, Julian stood at the rooftop of the Vega building and watched the sunset alone, a silent vow still etched into his soul. If they're out there, I'll find them. And somewhere, in a neighborhood far from glass towers and ocean views, a little girl with Camilla's eyes arranged crushed flowers in a chipped coffee mug, and waited for the man in her dreams who said he'd come back. 6 years is a long time to be haunted by silence. Julian Vega had once been the golden sun of Miami real estate. Every hand he shook turned to opportunity. Every high-rise he touched climbed toward the clouds. But after Camilla and Sophia disappeared, the light dimmed. He moved through life with precision, not passion. Function, not feeling. Each morning, he put on the same crisp suit, tightened the same steel-gray tie, walked into the same glass office with ocean views, and stared at the same painting, Camilla's final gift. Safe. He never moved it, never let anyone clean it, not even the assistants who rotated through his office every few months. They were warned once, and once was enough. Don't touch the painting, Julian had said, his voice clipped but eerily soft. The office was immaculate. The Vega name still held weight, but behind closed doors, Julian unraveled, quietly, completely. He hadn't dated, not really, not in the way his friends tried to coax him into. There were dinners, events, the occasional charity gala where women in backless dresses leaned in too close and laughed too hard. But Julian's eyes always drifted. His ears strained for a small giggle that matched Sophia's. His heart never moved. He buried himself in work. Projects expanded. New towers rose along the skyline like sentinels, testaments to what grief could build when it had nowhere else to go. The Vega portfolio doubled, tripled. Marco, ever the opportunist, stood beside him in boardrooms like a loyal second-in-command. But behind Julian's back, Marco's influence grew in quieter ways. He took more meetings with investors, whispered subtly about stabilizing leadership, and maneuvered financial decisions into his favor. Julian didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. At home, the South Beach mansion felt like a mausoleum. Sophia's room remained untouched. Tiny dresses still hung in her closet. Her stuffed koala sat on the windowsill, one button eye dangling by a thread. Julian had once picked it up, trying to sew it back on, but the needle slipped, and he bled. He left the thread half-looped, the blood dried faintly into the fabric. Her nightlight still worked. He tested it once a week, just in case. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of 3 a.m., Julian would walk the halls barefoot, half drunk on scotch, whispering her name. Sophia. Just to hear how it sounded, just to remember it still had weight. He never spoke Camilla's name out loud. That was harder. Sophia was hope. Camilla was guilt. What if Marco had been right? What if she had stolen from him? What if she ran because she didn't want him anymore? But every time those questions whispered in the back of his mind, he would return to the last drawing he'd found, the one Sophia made, the stick figures, the crown, the word us. He kept it locked in his desk behind the painting. He'd memorized every line, every color. It was his compass. Until one day, it wasn't enough. It was a humid Thursday when Julian's world shifted again. He was leaving a business lunch in Little Havana, one of those forgettable affairs where suits discussed market expansion and rooftop zoning permits. As he stepped out of the restaurant, his driver was delayed, so he walked. It had rained earlier, and the pavement still glistened. The smell of damp concrete and fried empanadas clung to the air. He passed a small convenience store with peeling paint and a rusted awning. Outside, a vendor was yelling, loud, cruel. "You clumsy brat! I told you not to drop those cans!" Julian turned. A small girl, 6, maybe 7, stood trembling beside a dented basket of fallen groceries. Her arms were too thin. Her shoes were too big. But it wasn't the size or the voice that stopped Julian in his tracks. It was her eyes, wide, deep brown, laced with something older than any child should carry. Camilla's eyes. The vendor kept berating her, but the girl said nothing. She simply knelt, wordlessly picking up a can of beans and wiping it on her shirt. Julian moved before thinking. "Hey," he said, his voice firm but calm. The vendor spun around, defensive. "She broke." "I'll pay for it," Julian interrupted, stepping forward. "Every can. Just stop shouting." The vendor grumbled, muttered something about charity cases, and stalked inside. The girl glanced up at Julian, unsure whether to be afraid or grateful. Julian crouched to her level. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Sophia," she whispered. He nearly collapsed. His heart slammed against his chest so hard it hurt. His vision blurred. He managed to nod. "That's a beautiful name." She looked at him strangely. "You okay, mister?" He nodded again, struggling to speak. "Yeah, yeah." Sophia gathered the last can and straightened her back with a quiet dignity that broke him in two. Julian stood, slowly. "I'm sorry that man yelled at you." "It's okay," she said with a small shrug. "He yells at everyone. Ruth says it's 'cause he's sad inside." "Ruth?" She nodded. "She watches me sometimes when Mama's not around." Julian's breath caught. His mouth went dry. "Your mom? What's her name?" But Sophia turned then, the conversation done, and walked off into the crowd with her basket balanced against her hip. Tiny, brave, and impossibly familiar. Julian didn't follow. Not yet. He stood there on that rainy sidewalk, trembling, watching her disappear into a neighborhood he no longer recognized. But this time, he didn't just ache. He knew. She was real. And she was Camilla's. And he was going to find her again. Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat in the den of his South Beach mansion. Lights dimmed. City noise muted behind triple-glazed glass, replaying every detail of the girl, Sophia, in his mind. The slope of her nose, the exact shade of her hair, the way she tucked her chin down when speaking softly, but mostly those eyes. Camila's eyes. He wasn't ready to make assumptions, not yet, but something deep inside, instinctual, undeniable, told him she wasn't just any child. She was his. The next morning, Julian dressed differently. No tailored suit, no Italian leather shoes, just jeans, a hoodie, and a cap pulled low. It had been years since he wore anything that didn't scream power, but today he didn't want to be recognized. Not as a billionaire, not as Julian Vega. He just wanted to find her. He returned to the same block in Little Havana, walking casually, scanning the alleys and storefronts. He checked the store where he first saw her, but the vendor only grunted in response to his questions. "Little girl? Brown eyes? Everyone's got brown eyes here. Get lost." Julian didn't flinch. He moved on. For hours, he circled the blocks, his eyes trained for that tiny figure, the dented basket, anything familiar. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, he caught sight of her. Across the street, the same coat, the same determined little walk. She was alone again, making her way past a crumbling mural. Julian didn't approach this time. He followed, carefully, quietly. She stopped at a faded green building with rusted balcony rails and mailboxes that looked like they hadn't been checked in years. The sign out front was chipped but legible. Ruth's Place. Children welcome. Julian watched from across the street as she knocked on the side door. A tall, older woman opened it. Gray hair in a loose bun, kindness written in every soft line of her face. "Back already?" The woman smiled, brushing dirt off Sophia's cheek with maternal affection. Sophia nodded and held up a wrinkled dollar bill. "I helped Miss Clara carry her groceries." The woman grinned. "You're gonna wear yourself out saving the world, baby." Julian's throat tightened. He waited until the door closed behind them. Then he crossed the street, walked up the stoop, and knocked, harder than he meant to. A moment later, the woman opened it again, this time with cautious eyes. "Yes?" "I'm looking for a girl named Sophia," Julian said slowly. "She was here yesterday. Brown eyes, maybe 6 or 7. She helped a vendor, he yelled at her, and He stopped, trying not to sound too desperate. The woman narrowed her eyes. "You a relative?" Julian hesitated. "No, not yet. I think she's my daughter." There was a pause, a heavy, suspicious silence that made Julian's skin crawl. "You need to leave," she said, stepping forward to block the door. "Please," he whispered. "I'm not here to take her or scare her. I just want to talk." "And what makes you so sure she's yours?" "Her name, her eyes. She looks exactly like her mother." The woman folded her arms. "What was her mother's name?" Julian swallowed hard. "Camila Diaz." The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back, just slightly. "She's inside, but if I see anything I don't like, if you make her cry, I'll throw you out myself." Julian nodded, grateful beyond words. Inside, the apartment was modest but clean. Children's drawings covered the walls. A pot of something warm simmered on the stove. It smelled like cumin and hope. Sophia sat at the kitchen table coloring, her little brow furrowed in concentration, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. The woman, Ruth, he assumed, cleared her throat. "Sophia, someone's here to see you." Sophia turned, and her eyes lit with faint recognition. "You again?" Julian crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "Hi, I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," she said, setting her crayon down. He smiled. "That's good. Can I sit?" She shrugged. "I guess." He sat slowly. "Sophia, do you know who your father is?" Sophia blinked, then glanced at Ruth, unsure. "It's okay," Ruth said softly. "Just be honest." Sophia looked back at Julian. "Mama never told me his name, just that he had to work a lot. and that he didn't know about me. Julian's hands trembled under the table. She said that? Sophia nodded. Mama said, if he knew, he'd come. Julian blinked rapidly, emotion rising like a tide. I'm here, he whispered. I didn't know, but I'm here now. Sophia's expression didn't change much, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. I think you look like me, she said quietly. I think you look like your mom. She smiled faintly, and then, as if sensing something in him, some deep, trembling sincerity, she reached across the table and placed her tiny hand over his. It was the softest act, but it broke him. Julian closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 years, something inside him began to heal. Julian didn't sleep again that night, but this time it wasn't restlessness that kept him awake. It was purpose. He sat in his study, Camilla's painting hanging across from him, illuminated by a single lamp. Sophia's voice echoed in his mind. Mama said, if he knew, he'd come. The words stirred something primal in him. The weight of years lost was crushing, but now that he'd found her, he wasn't going to lose her again. That morning, he returned to Ruth's place with breakfast. Fresh arepas, sweet mango juice, and a modest bouquet of daisies Sophia could keep in a plastic cup by her bed. She greeted him with the same guarded look, but there was a softness there now, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. She asked about you, Ruth admitted as they stood in the narrow kitchen. Said you looked like someone in a photo her mom kept. Julian nodded slowly. Do you know where that photo is? She used to keep it in a small red box. Sophia calls it her mom box. Has drawings, letters, a few old photos. May I see it? He asked carefully. Ruth hesitated, then motioned for him to follow. In the shared bedroom, Sophia was already dressed, her dark hair neatly combed, a little mismatched bow clipped at the side. Good morning, Princess, Julian greeted, kneeling beside her. Sophia tilted her head. I told Miss Ruth you might come back. And you were right, he smiled. I brought breakfast. She beamed at the word. A few minutes later, while Sophia ate, Ruth handed Julian the box. It was worn, the corners frayed from years of being opened and closed by small, curious hands. Inside, he found a few finger paintings, a dried-out flower, and then, there it was, a photo of him and Camilla at a gala, her in that green velvet dress he'd never forgotten, her hand resting on his chest. They looked young, in love, unbreakable. Behind the photo was a note, handwritten in Camilla's looping script. If something ever happens to me, and you find this, her name is Sophia. She's everything good in the world. She'll look for you in every kindness. Julian clutched the photo to his chest, his breath hitching. You okay? Sophia asked softly from the bed. He turned to her, blinking away tears. I am now. After breakfast, Sophia insisted on showing Julian her drawing collection, proudly pulling out one picture after another, him and her under a giant rainbow, her and Miss Ruth riding dolphins, Camilla smiling under a sky of stars. In one drawing, Julian noticed something odd. Tiny details. The background wasn't their apartment or a beach. It was a garden, a brick path, a specific black bench. Where is this? He asked, holding up the page. Sophia peered over his shoulder. That's where Mama used to take me before. She paused. Before she got hurt. Do you remember where it is? Sophia nodded. I think so. We used to walk there on Sundays. Julian's pulse quickened. Would you show me? That afternoon, they walked together, Sophia skipping slightly, holding his hand, completely unaware of how sacred that small gesture was to him. Ruth followed a few steps behind, giving them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. They turned down 3 blocks, past a closed ice cream shop, and finally stopped at a quiet park tucked between 2 aging apartment buildings. Julian scanned the area and then saw it, the black bench, the same one from Sophia's drawing, and something else. Carved into the wood of the bench was a name. Camila plus S. "She used to sit here with me every Sunday," Sophia said softly. "She said this was our safe spot." Julian sat on the bench, overwhelmed. "I need to know what happened," he said to Ruth once they were alone. "I mean the full story. Who helped her? How did they end up here?" Ruth sighed deeply, then sat beside him. "Camilla showed up at my shelter 5 years ago. Sophia was a baby. Camilla was scared, bruised, but proud. She refused to tell me much. Just said she'd been betrayed. Said she couldn't trust anyone from her old life." Julian's voice cracked. "And she never said my name?" "No," Ruth replied. "But the way she held Sophia, she talked about you like a man she used to love, like someone she couldn't bear to hate." Julian stared at the carving on the bench, Camila plus S. The world narrowed. He made a decision right then. "I'm hiring someone," he said. "A private investigator. I want to know who hurt her, who followed her, why she ended up here. This wasn't random, and it wasn't right." Ruth nodded slowly. "Then be careful. Whoever sent her running might still be watching." Julian's gaze sharpened. "Let them watch. I'm not hiding anymore." And as Sophia laughed nearby, balancing on a painted curb, Julian whispered to himself, "I'm coming for the truth." The next day, Julian returned to the park bench alone. He needed quiet, needed to feel close to her, and the carving, Camila plus S, felt like a whisper from a life he thought he'd lost forever. He sat in the fading sunlight, the breeze soft against his face, and tried to picture her there again, her laughter, the way she would have tucked Sophia's hair behind her ear as the little girl babbled about the clouds. He wasn't just mourning anymore. He was searching, with a fire he hadn't felt since the day Camila disappeared. By evening, he met with Marcus Duval, a former federal investigator turned private consultant. Ruth had vouched for him personally. "I want everything," Julian said, voice low but steady. "Who hurt her? Who followed her? Who took everything from my daughter?" Duval studied Julian for a moment, then nodded. "We'll start with incident reports. If her name shows up in any medical, legal, or criminal records in the last 6 years, I'll find it." Julian exhaled and passed him a photo of Camila. She was everything, and now she's gone. For the next 3 days, Julian kept close to Sophia, visiting her each afternoon after school, walking her to Ruth's, sometimes helping her with math homework she didn't really need help with, just excuses to hear her voice, to memorize her expressions. They were in the middle of building a paper volcano when Sophia asked, out of the blue, "Do you miss my mom?" The question hit him like a wave. "Every day," he said honestly, folding a red triangle into the volcano's rim. Sophia glanced down. "She used to cry at night sometimes, when she thought I was asleep." Julian's hand froze. "She said it was okay to cry for things you loved." His heart cracked quietly and deeply. She was right. That night, his phone rang. "Julian," Duval said on the line. "We found the report. Camila Diaz, age 33, victim of an armed robbery at a convenience store in Little Havana, shot in the chest during the incident, died en route to the hospital." Julian closed his eyes. His throat tightened. When? 3 years ago, February 6th. That date pierced him like a needle. He remembered it. He'd been in New York, closing a deal, celebrated with champagne that same night, while she died, alone. "And Sophia?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "According to hospital records, the child wasn't present, but we found a witness statement from a neighbor. She had been babysitting Sophia that night. Camila had gone out to buy groceries, bread, milk, a drawing pad." Julian collapsed into his chair, holding his head in his hands. A drawing pad. She died trying to bring their daughter a little piece of joy. The silence on the phone lingered until Duval added, "Julian, I think there's more to this. The witness mentioned a man. Said he'd been hanging around the store the past few days." Camilla looked nervous, like she expected him. Julian sat up slowly. "Did they identify him?" "Not by name. But we're pulling footage and cross-checking it against known affiliates of your former business partner, Marco Delano." Julian's stomach turned to stone. He hadn't spoken Marco's name aloud in years. Marco had always been competitive, always one step behind, but determined to catch up. And when Julian found love, Marco became cold, resentful. Julian had written it off as jealousy, until now. "Keep digging," he said tightly. After the call, he walked to Ruth's. He needed to see Sophia. She was in bed already, but awake, coloring under a dim nightlight. Julian sat beside her quietly, just watching. "Hey," she said sleepily. "Hey, sunshine." "Are you sad?" she asked, setting down her crayon. He nodded. "Yeah, a little." "Is it about Mama?" His voice caught, but he managed to answer, "Yeah." She scooted closer and laid her head on his shoulder. "I think about her all the time. I don't want to forget her voice." Julian wrapped his arm around her, holding her gently. "You won't," he whispered. "I promise. I'll help you remember everything." They sat there, the quiet hum of the night filling the room. And then, in the softest, most innocent voice, Sophia asked, "Did you love her?" Julian swallowed the lump rising in his throat. "With everything I had?" She looked up at him. "Then maybe you can love me too?" His chest shattered. He bent and kissed her forehead, his voice rough with emotion. "I already do." She smiled and closed her eyes. And in that fragile, sacred silence, Julian Vega made another vow, one fiercer than vengeance, stronger than grief. He would protect this child with every breath he had left. And no matter who stood in his way, justice for Camila would come, even if he had to burn everything down to get it. By dawn, Julian Vega was no longer grieving. He was preparing for war. The sun hadn't yet climbed over Miami's skyline when he stood in the glass-walled office of Duval Investigations. His reflection stared back at him in the window, haunted eyes, unshaven face, a fury too quiet to ignore. Duval entered with 2 thick folders and a look that said, "You were right to be suspicious." "We pulled security footage from the convenience store," Duval began, "and matched the man lurking outside to someone tied to Marco Delano's old security firm. Name's Carlos Jerez, former military, dishonorably discharged, known for dirty work, intimidation, collection jobs, worse." Julian's fists clenched. "And this is who was near Camila before she was shot?" Duval nodded. "We also found financial ties. Carlos received 2 payments from a Cayman Islands account linked to an offshore holding owned by Delano Holdings." "So Marco paid him." "Looks that way. And there's more. The robbery that killed Camila? It was no random hit. No cash was taken. No merchandise. Just the bag she carried." Julian sat down hard, like the wind had been knocked from him. "She had no enemies," he said slowly. "No debt. She didn't even have a credit card when I met her." "She had one thing Marco wanted gone," Duval replied, eyes narrowing. "You. Or more specifically, your legacy." Julian stared at the folder. His chest felt tight. "Sophia." Duval nodded solemnly. "Marco's jealousy ran deeper than we thought. We now believe he orchestrated the separation, paid off false witnesses, fabricated the embezzlement claim, and when Camila disappeared with your daughter, Marco lost his leverage. He tried to scare her back, but she never came." Julian stood again, this time steadier. Where is Carlos now? In the wind. He went off grid last year, but we're tracking financials, old associates, burner phones. He'll surface. Julian exhaled. He better, because I'm done letting cowards take from me. As he left the office, a text from Ruth appeared. Sophia's teacher said she drew a picture of you two on a boat. Thought you'd want to see it. Attached was a shaky but touching crayon sketch. A tall man with dark hair holding the hand of a little girl, both smiling, the sea bright blue around them. Julian stared at it. She was dreaming about him, imagining life with him. And she had no idea her mother's death had been no accident. Back at his penthouse, Julian opened the safe in his study, pulled out the worn painting Camila had made of the beach, the one she finished just before their wedding. It still smelled faintly of sea salt and paint. He whispered to the canvas, "I swear to you, Camila, he will pay." That afternoon, he returned to Ruth's. Sophia was sitting cross-legged in the corner, building a cardboard rocket ship. She looked up and grinned. "You're early." Julian knelt beside her. "Needed to see my co-pilot." She beamed, then hesitated. "Did you ever find out what happened to Mama?" He gently touched her shoulder. "I'm still working on it, sweetheart. But I promise you, when I do, you'll be the first to know." She nodded, solemnly. "Okay." That night, as Sophia slept on Ruth's couch beneath a quilt stitched with moon and star patterns, Julian met Rosa, their former housekeeper, outside her sister's home on 5th Street. Her hands trembled slightly as she lit a cigarette. "I never stopped feeling guilty," she said, voice brittle. "Camila trusted me, and when she came to me for help, I didn't do enough." "What do you mean?" Julian pressed. "She showed me the fake documents Marco had delivered to your firm. She said someone was framing her. She begged me to talk to you, but I was afraid. He threatened my grandson, said if I opened my mouth he'd make him disappear." Tears slid down her cheeks. Julian's voice was gentle but firm. "You're safe now, I promise." Rosa looked up at him, eyes watery. "You have to stop him, Julian. For Camila, and for that little girl who still thinks her mama died because of bad luck." He nodded slowly, resolutely. The next day, Duvall returned with a lead. "We tracked Carlos's last burner to a safe house in Hialeah, but he's on the move. I'd bet anything Marco's either hiding him or planning to silence him." Julian didn't hesitate. "Let's flush him out." "How?" "We hit Marco where it hurts. Make him desperate. He'll move, and when he does, we'll be ready." That night, Julian made his first public appearance in months at a real estate gala hosted by the city's elite. Every camera turned to him, and in a moment that stunned the room, he announced a $10 million donation to an art therapy foundation in Camila's name. "She believed art could heal," he said emotionally. "Now, her name will help others find peace." Marco stood at the back, wine glass frozen in hand, eyes dark. Julian saw him, nodded politely. It was war now. Only one of them would walk away unscathed, and Julian had already lost too much to lose again. The ocean was dark that night, no moon, no stars, just the slow, steady rhythm of waves hitting the rocks outside Julian's penthouse. But inside, everything was accelerating. Julian stood by the window, holding a flash drive Duvall had just handed him, its weight far heavier than its size suggested. "This is the final nail," Duvall said softly. "You were right. Marco orchestrated everything." Julian didn't move. His jaw clenched, his breath shallow. "Show me." Duvall plugged the drive into Julian's laptop. On screen appeared scanned files, emails, offshore wire transfers, confidential surveillance logs. One folder labeled Camila, another labeled Sophia. Duvall clicked a video file. Grainy footage played. Surveillance from a camera across from Camila's last known residence. Julian watched, heart in his throat, as the same man from the convenience store, the one who would later be identified as Carlos Jerez, lingered near the property 2 nights before the shooting. He wasn't just casing the building, Duvall muttered. He was waiting. Julian stared at the screen. He couldn't blink. Then came the clincher, a document trail, digitally signed, showing Marco's company wiring a payment to a shell corporation, one used to funnel funds to Carlos. But what hit Julian the hardest wasn't the footage or the bank records. It was a scanned letter, written in Camila's handwriting. He leaned closer, lips moving as he read. Julian, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll find Sophia. She's everything good in this world. I left because I didn't want you dragged into this. I knew Marco wouldn't stop until he took everything. But if you're reading this, it means he finally did. Julian exhaled slowly, every fiber of his being trembling. Duvall's voice was quiet, respectful. She wrote that a week before she died, left it with Rosa, but told her not to deliver it unless something happened. She knew, Julian whispered, barely audible. She knew Marco would come for her. And she still stayed hidden to protect you and your daughter. For a long moment, Julian said nothing. He looked out toward the sea where the waves crashed, softly, insistently, just like Camila's voice used to fill his home. I don't want justice anymore, he said finally, each word slow and heavy. I want the truth to bury him. The next morning, Julian met with a quiet, sharp-eyed assistant U.S. attorney named Melissa Chen. She reviewed the files Duvall provided and said nothing for 15 straight minutes. Then, finally, she looked up. You realize what this means, Mr. Vega? I do. This isn't just embezzlement. This is conspiracy to commit murder. Julian's voice was calm, but icy. I want a case that sticks. No loopholes. No chance of him squirming out. Chen nodded. We'll build it airtight. Meanwhile, at Ruth's home, Sophia worked on her school project, an illustrated timeline of her life. She'd drawn stick figures of her mother holding her hand, then later a new one of Julian. In each version, her smile grew wider. When Julian came by that afternoon, she rushed into his arms. I made you a page, she said proudly, holding up the drawing. This is you saving me from the bad guys. Julian's eyes blurred. He crouched down and hugged her tightly. You saved me too, sweetheart. More than you know. That night, Rosa visited Julian again. Her eyes brimmed with regret and hope. There's something else, she said hesitantly. Camila left something behind. A small box. I wasn't sure when to give it to you. She handed it over. Worn wood, tied with faded ribbon. Inside was a baby bracelet engraved with Sofia Vega and a tiny tube of paint, Camila's favorite shade of ocean blue. Julian clutched it in his palm. She never stopped loving us. No, Rosa whispered. She just knew she had to love you both from a distance. The next morning, Marco's empire began to splinter. Julian sent out a press release. In it, he announced his resignation from day-to-day operations at Vega Properties, passing the role to a newly formed board. The company would now pivot to fund housing programs for low-income families, Camila's vision realized. Investors were confused. Some called it bold. Others called it reckless. But Marco? Marco panicked. That evening, Marco stormed into the lobby of Julian's building, red-faced and sweating. What the hell are you doing? Julian met him by the elevator with a calm that masked volcanic fury. You always thought you were clever, Julian said, but the truth has been waiting. What truth? Marco hissed. Don't play games. Julian stepped closer, lowered his voice. You sent a man to kill the mother of my child. You lied to me. You broke her. You tried to take Sophia, and now? He held up the flash drive. Now you lose everything. Marco's smirk faltered, and in that instant Julian knew His fear had finally eclipsed his arrogance. As Marco stormed off, Julian's phone buzzed. Duval. Carlos Jerez just surfaced, trying to flee. Homeland Security has him. He's singing already. Julian didn't smile. He simply said, "Good. Let him sing loud." He looked toward the sea once more. For the first time in 6 years, it didn't feel like it was mourning her anymore. It felt like it was calling her name in peace. The sun hadn't yet risen over Biscayne Bay when Julian's phone rang. He was already awake, sitting at the edge of his bed, the baby bracelet still resting in his palm from the night before. When he saw Duval's name flashing on the screen, his gut tightened. "They're moving," Duval said without preamble. "Marco's men just picked up a black SUV registered to a dummy company he uses. Same men who tried to follow you last week." Julian's voice turned cold. "Do they have Sophia?" "Not yet," Duval replied, "but we think they're planning to grab her after school today. They scoped out the area twice yesterday." Julian's blood turned to ice. He stood, already moving. "Pull her from school. Now. I'll handle the rest." Within the hour, Sophia was safe in Ruth's house, unaware of how close she had come to being taken. Ruth's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped an arm around the child. "She asked why she wasn't going to class," Ruth said. "I told her it was a special day with her dad." Julian knelt beside Sophia and kissed her forehead. "That's right, mija. You and me. We're going to do something brave today." Sophia grinned, innocent and joyful. "Do I get to wear my sparkly shoes?" Julian smiled, holding back the swell of emotion in his throat. "Of course." While Sophia colored quietly in the next room, Julian turned to Duval, who had just arrived with Chen, the federal attorney. Maps were spread out on the table, surveillance footage, license plates, blueprints. "They're targeting this intersection outside her school," Chen said, pointing. "It's narrow, limited cameras, perfect for a quick grab." "Perfect for an ambush," Julian said grimly. They set the plan in motion quickly. Chen arranged for undercover federal marshals. Duval planted trackers on the getaway vehicle. Julian would serve as bait. At 2:45 p.m., Julian's car pulled into the exact spot Marco's men had been circling for days. He stepped out alone, wearing sunglasses, holding a child's backpack filled with decoys. To anyone watching, he looked like a distracted father waiting for school dismissal. The SUV appeared at 3:02. Duval's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Black SUV confirmed. 3 men inside, 1 exiting now." Julian turned, pretending to look toward the school. But then, as if on cue, everything changed. The man in the hoodie rushed toward him, yanking the door of Julian's car. Finding no child inside, he panicked. Too late. "Now," Julian said into the mic. Within seconds, unmarked cruisers and federal agents poured from alleys and side streets. The SUV tried to reverse, slamming into a light post. Agents swarmed. The man closest to Julian drew a knife but was tackled before he could move further. Julian stood still, his hands clenched at his sides, breathing heavily. It was over. Later that night, back at Ruth's home, Sophia ran into his arms. "Did the bad guys go away?" Julian nodded, holding her close, unable to speak. She looked up at him and said softly, "You were really brave." "No," he whispered, voice cracking. "You were. Every single day." When Sophia went to bed, Julian stepped outside, standing under the stars. The sky was vast, quiet. For the first time in years, it didn't feel suffocating. Inside, Ruth brought out tea, her eyes gentle. "She doesn't know how close it came, does she?" Julian shook his head. "And she won't, not if I can help it." Ruth hesitated, then said, "There's something else, from Camilla." She handed him a sealed envelope with his name on it, the handwriting unmistakable. Julian opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, written in soft blue ink. Julian, if you ever find this, it means I couldn't protect her the way I wanted. But I know you will. I've never stopped loving you, even after I left. I had to choose between staying with you and keeping her alive. I chose her. Always. If you're holding this letter, I believe you've chosen her too. That's the only way we win. Camilla. Julian closed his eyes. For years, he had thought of her absence as abandonment. Now he understood. It was sacrifice. The next morning, news of the attempted kidnapping and arrests hit the headlines. But Julian didn't care about the articles, the media, or even the incoming calls from shareholders. He sat at the breakfast table with Sophia, pouring syrup on her pancakes, listening to her giggle as she told him her dreams. He was exactly where he needed to be. And Marco? Marco was about to face the reckoning he'd earned. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and old anger. Julian Vega sat still in the witness chair, his hands folded calmly, but his jaw was tense, his knuckles pale against his tailored slacks. Across the aisle, Marco Reyes looked nothing like the man who used to toast champagne on yachts and laugh beside him at rooftop lounges. He was sunken now, his designer suit hanging loose on his frame, his bravado extinguished by what he knew was coming. The prosecutor's voice rang through the hushed room. "Mr. Vega, please state for the record what you discovered." Julian's voice was steady, but each word carried the weight of 6 agonizing years. "I discovered that my former friend, Marco Reyes, arranged the armed robbery that led to the death of my wife, Camila Diaz Vega. He paid a man to follow her movements, waited until she was alone, and had her murdered." Gasps broke out across the courtroom. Marco flinched, but Julian didn't look at him. He focused instead on the jury, the strangers who would decide whether Camilla's death would finally matter to more than just him and Sophia. The prosecutor handed over bank records, photographs, and emails. The trail of evidence meticulously uncovered by Julian's investigator. The most damning was a voice message Marco left for one of the hired men. A single, chilling sentence. "Just make sure she disappears before anyone asks questions." Julian inhaled slowly. He didn't just take her from me. He left a little girl motherless. He left me believing, for years, that she had betrayed me. And then he tried to take my daughter. From the back of the room, Ruth sat with Sophia nestled against her side. Sophia was too young to understand the legal jargon, but she understood her father's voice, its pain, its courage. When Julian turned for a moment and caught her small eyes watching him, he softened visibly. "I'm here," he whispered, not into the microphone, but toward his daughter, "and I'm not leaving." The defense tried to paint the accusations as revenge, tried to twist the truth into ambition, but the evidence crushed every attempt. Witnesses testified. One of Marco's former assistants, visibly shaken, revealed she'd been ordered to shred financial records that would have shown the payoff. A second man, once paid to watch Sophia's movements, admitted guilt in a voice soaked in regret. Finally, it was Marco's turn to speak. He stood, adjusted his tie with shaking hands, and addressed the court. "I made mistakes," he said, "but I didn't kill anyone." But his voice lacked conviction. No apology, no remorse, just a final, flailing attempt to maintain a grip on the reputation he'd already lost. Julian didn't react. He didn't need to. The truth was too loud now to be denied. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, Julian exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. There were no cheers, no outbursts, just the heavy silence of justice settling like a final stone atop a grave that should never have existed. Outside the courtroom, Sophia ran into his arms. "Is the bad man going away?" she asked, her voice small and trembling. Julian crouched to her level, wrapping her gently in his embrace. "Yes, baby. He's not coming near us again, ever." She pressed her cheek into his shoulder, her little fingers clutching his lapel. That night, the city lights blinked across the water like stars dipped in gold. Julian and Ruth sat on the balcony of his penthouse while Sophia painted quietly on the floor inside. She was humming, a soft, tuneless melody Camilla used to sing while washing dishes. It stopped Julian in his tracks. "She remembers," he whispered. Ruth nodded. "Pieces come back when they feel safe, and she's safe now." Julian turned his face upward, the wind brushing his hair as he exhaled into the Miami night. "I want to adopt her formally. Tomorrow. No delays." Ruth smiled, her eyes misty. "Then that's what you'll do." Inside, Sophia held up her painting proudly. A house, a sun, a garden full of flowers, and in the middle, 3 stick figures holding hands. "Look, Daddy," she said brightly. "It's us, me, you, and Mommy in the sky." Julian walked over and dropped to his knees. His voice cracked as he whispered, "It's beautiful." And it was. For the first time since Camilla's death, something beautiful had grown from the wreckage, something unbreakable. The courthouse was quieter this time. No media, no glares from prosecutors or defense teams. Just a single judge, a small wooden bench, and the echo of Sophia's tiny shoes as she skipped down the hallway, holding Julian's hand. Julian Vega had been in dozens of courtrooms. To close real estate deals, settle property disputes, defend company trademarks. But this moment, this one, right here, was the most important hearing of his life. "Julian Emilio Vega," the judge said warmly, glancing down at the paperwork before her, "do you understand that by signing this, you are accepting full legal guardianship and parental responsibility for Sofia Diaz Vega?" Julian's voice was clear, unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Sophia stood beside him, not entirely sure what was happening but sensing it was something big. She held tightly to Julian's hand, and when the judge smiled and said, "Then I hereby finalize this adoption," Sophia's lips curved into a quiet smile. She leaned against Julian's side, and he instinctively knelt to wrap his arms around her. "I'm your dad now," he whispered into her hair, "forever." That evening, back at the mansion overlooking Biscayne Bay, Ruth stood in the garden helping Sophia plant wildflowers. Sophia had picked out 4 tiny pots and carefully spaced each one for her mom, one for herself, one for Julian, and one with no name. Julian watched from the balcony, his eyes softening as he turned to the easel beside him. Camilla's final painting, rescued from a forgotten storage unit where she had once taken shelter, had been cleaned, reframed, and placed in a prominent corner. A swirl of ocean blues, coral pinks, and vivid orange sun rays danced across the canvas. It wasn't just art. It was a memory, a promise, a beacon. Underneath it hung a small bronze plaque. "In memory of Camilla Diaz, Vega, the color she left behind will never fade." He walked down the steps toward Sophia, who was patting the soil in her last pot. "Who's the 4th one for?" he asked gently. Sophia glanced up. "It's for Mommy. But the flowers are for kids who don't have mommies or daddies yet, so they can still grow." Julian's breath caught. His daughter's heart, so much like Camilla's, beat with empathy and quiet wisdom. That night, they held a private ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Camilla Foundation for Arts and Resilience, a program Julian had spent months building in silence. It would offer scholarships to children from underserved communities, fund grief and art therapy initiatives in local schools, and train trauma-informed art educators in Camilla's name. Sophia held the oversized scissors with Julian, giggling as they sliced the silk ribbon across the patio arch. "She would have loved this," Ruth whispered. Julian nodded slowly. "She built this through her love, through Sophia, through everything she left behind. The days that followed were filled with warmth. Not perfection, but something better. Truth, healing, and forward motion. Every Sunday, Julian and Sophia took a walk through the Wynwood Walls district, where murals bloomed like oversized journals on every building. One afternoon, Sophia stopped in front of a large wall being painted by a young artist. Without asking, she stepped forward, pointed to the center, and said, "You should put a sunflower there." The artist, moved by her certainty, paused. "Why?" "Because they always find the light," Sophia answered. Julian looked down at her. "Is that something your mom taught you?" "No," she said with a proud little grin. "It's something I remembered all by myself." The following month, the artist unveiled the mural with a large sunflower at its heart. At the bottom, in white cursive script, were the words, "For the children who grow in broken soil and still bloom." One night, as the Miami wind pushed soft ocean air through open windows, Sophia curled up next to Julian on the couch, a half-colored drawing on her lap and her head resting against his chest. "Will you tell me a story?" she asked, drowsy. "Of course," he replied, brushing her hair back gently. "What kind?" "Tell me how you found me again," she murmured, eyes already fluttering closed. Julian's voice was low, reverent. "Once there was a man who thought he'd lost everything. But one day he saw a little girl with a smile that reminded him what hope looked like. So he followed the smile, and he found his whole world waiting." Sophia yawned. "That's a good story." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "It's our story." And in the silence that followed, Julian let the past settle behind him. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, it had all brought him here, to a daughter who laughed like Camila, loved like Camila, and carried within her the quiet power of resilience. Outside, the waves lapped gently against the shore. A new beginning had taken root, unfolding gently, purposefully, like wildflowers finding light through cracks in stone. Julian closed his eyes, holding her close. Not as a billionaire, not as a man seeking redemption, but as a father, grateful, humbled, and finally, whole.